We're going to get started. Welcome, everyone. My name is Cecile Holt, and I'm joined today by Diane Nolan. We are both private wealth advisors with Argent Bridge Advisors, and the topic today of our coffee and conversation is to talk about employee benefits and making sure that you do not leave anything on the table. We do offer these kind of webinars monthly, so if you're interested, feel free to go on our website, argentbridge.com. All of our webinars are recorded and archived there, so if you don't have time to always join us live, just use our website as your resource. So we have a lot to cover today, so I don't want to waste too much time, and we definitely want to leave some room for questions. So feel free to ask questions, and just kind of as a housekeeping item, please don't use a chat to submit your questions. Use the Q&A if you can, so that it's easier for us to see what comes in. So definitely feel free to interrupt us and ask questions, and we'll take them as they come. So let me move on. So go ahead, Diane.
No, I was just going to say Q&A is the double bubble at the bottom or sometimes at the top of your screen.
That's right. So on our agenda today, it's going to be very conversational between Diane and I, but we do want to touch on these particular points. So we'll be talking about, basic benefits that are offered to most people by their employer. It's not always the case. But most of the time, these will be part of your benefit package. Insurance, maybe life, health, disability, retirement, and then some other extra benefits. And then we'll also be touching on more complex benefits that may not be offered to everybody, but are usually pretty lucrative or good to have. So again, a lot on our agenda today, but we're hoping to go through it within 30 minutes or so. Okay, so let's get started. So the most, when we talk about employer benefit, what usually comes to mind is health insurance first, I would say. And so the question that we often get from clients is, how do I choose my plan? And then if my spouse is also offered a plan, like which one do we choose? So there's definitely no blanket answer there, unfortunately, just because it really depends. It depends on your needs, and it depends on the plans that are offered to you. Some employers will have much better plans than others. So the true answer there is definitely take some time to look at your plan, look at your needs. What doctors you have. Do you have a need for in-network physicians, or do you have some doctors that would become out of network with your plan? And so again, we'd probably need an hour to talk about this, but the answer is take the time to look at it, bring it to your financial advisor if you need to. And we also have some really great resources, some insurance professional who may be able to help with that. But health insurance is so important, and more so not having health insurance can be a huge risk. So this is a big one. It's worth spending some time.
And I think you also touched on this in an earlier webinar too, right, Cecile? When you turn 65 and you have Medicare as one of your options, how do you treat your health insurance through your employer? So we have covered that, and that's another webinar. When you go back through our webinar library, feel free to.
Sure. We covered Medicare, and we actually covered what happens if you decide to go independent and not have employer covered benefits before you even reach Medicare age. So we do have some resources there. That's a good point. So another thing that may or may not be offered to you as part of your benefit is there's a lot of confusion around flex spending accounts, FSAs, and health savings accounts, HSAs. So the difference between they're both wonderful things, and they basically allow you to save on a pre-tax basis for health related expenses. I would say that if you have the choice between the two, HSAs are probably a little bit more powerful because they're more flexible. With an FSA, you have to use all of your benefits within a calendar year, where with the HSA, you can actually carry that benefit over, and it kind of gets treated like an IRA over time. So it's a wonderful, wonderful tool that's still flexible. It allows you to pay for non-covered out-of-pocket expenses, medical expenses on a pre-tax basis, but also use it later if you don't need it. So it's really a neat tool. The downside, and I have a slide on this, and we're happy to share that with you if you're interested as a follow-up. The downside of an HSA is usually you need to have a high deductible health plan to even be eligible, but it is a nice benefit. So
yeah, I would agree. I think the once you get past some of the complexities, right, of how to optimize a health savings account, I agree with you. I think that's the better of the two, and that we've advised clients to hang on to that benefit well into retirement, let it compound, tax deferred, and coming out for health expenses to be available tax-free. We're always looking for different pots of resources in retirement.
Right. And yeah, sometimes it can just be used as a retirement saving. Once you max your 401k, maybe you maxed your Roth already, or your IRA. This is another great source of deferring some income.
Right.
So another big one is life insurance. Typically your employer will offer 1 to 2 times salary, and that really depends, but oftentimes we see this. It's usually 1 to 2 times salary is going to be paid by your employer, and that kind of happens as a default, so you don't have to worry about that. Where you will have to make a decision is around supplemental coverage. That means that you may be offered more than just your 1 or 2, 3 times salary, but then you will have likely to pay for it. So the decision becomes, is that coverage worth it based on cost? So there are pros and cons to this, and sometimes we'll advise people to actually consider insurance a private policy versus what is offered through their employer,
Right.
especially if they're young and healthy, and they may be able to get a cheaper coverage on their own versus relying on their employer coverage. So don't necessarily think because it's offered to you through your employer as a group plan that it's going to be a good deal. And we see it especially with government workers, where in the early years, the life insurance benefits offered by the government are very affordable. They're heavily subsidized. But as you get closer to 50, it actually becomes a very expensive benefit. So another point there is, don't necessarily assume that because it was a good deal at one point, it's always going to be a good deal. So it
Excellent
absolutely
point.
needs to be reviewed at least annually. And just make sure that it still makes sense for your family, it's still affordable, and so on and so forth.
I think clients are also surprised when they have to go through underwriting for the supplemental coverage. And because if you thought that the employer benefit was just easier, it's not always easier, right? You have to go through underwriting either way. So let's explore it on a private policy basis just to compare.
Definitely, yes. And sometimes, another big concept of using that supplemental is that it's not portable. So assume that, you find another great job and you leave your current employer. You may not be able to carry that policy over, and who knows if your new employer will be offering this, or what if you decide to open your own business and go on your own, then you would need to secure your own policy. So
and maybe a health incident somewhere in there too. So securing it for yourself for a long period of time that you don't have to worry about going through underwriting again is another consideration.
Definitely, yes. So, again, it just does require a little bit of, a thoughtful approach around that. Don't necessarily set aside more than just 5 minutes when you get a new job and you have to answer all these questions, because it is part of your whole plan, right?
Great.
So the next one is disability. People often kind of oversee this or don't even know what it means, but disability is essentially a coverage that would be offered to you if you couldn't work. And the definition of this can actually vary. Sometimes it's a very generic definition saying that you can't do any work, or sometimes there is a rider that's added to this policy that says that you would be entitled to receiving payments if you couldn't perform your current job or a job that's aligned with your skills. So there's definitely different definitions, but the main definition is the point of getting disability insurance is to protect you should you not be able to work. So there are two main kinds of disability insurance. One is short-term, one is long-term. Long-term is usually very cheap as part of a group insurance. Your employer may even pay for it, but even if you have to pay for it, it's usually so cheap, it's not worth not getting, especially for the kind of coverage that it offers. Like Diane was mentioning earlier, we don't really see clients,
Claim it.
collect on this benefit
Right.
that often, but when they do, it's just so important because
They do, it's likely something that's permanent and very costly to self-fund in the event there's a long-term disability.
Mhm. And as much as I was saying that long-term disability coverage is cheap, short-term can actually be pretty pricey. Again, unless your employer pays for it, definitely go for it. But if you have to pay for it yourself, sometimes short-term can be rather expensive. So that you may weigh the pros and cons of getting a short-term disability benefit versus having your own emergency fund. So we don't always recommend that clients get short-term unless maybe you're a woman and you plan on being pregnant in the short term. That's usually a good benefit to have, but otherwise it's not that much of a clear cut. So who pays for the premium?
Yeah.
That's a big one. Do you want to cover that one,
No,
Di?
I was just going to say the importance of understanding that and the tax considerations down the road also.
Right. Yeah. So, it may sound attractive to have your employer pay for your premiums for long-term or short-term. However, it has big tax consequences if you were to receive a benefit. So what I mean by this is if your employer pays for the premium, then likely your benefit is going to be taxable to you. So that could be a meaningful difference, right? If you think you're going to be getting, let's say, $5,000 a month, if you were to become disabled, $5,000 tax-free versus $5,000 taxable means a lot less in your pocket at the end of the day. So it's not necessarily actually a bad idea for you to be paying the premium so that you can get a tax-free benefit on the back end.
Especially when you consider that the benefit itself is going to be a percentage of your salary. Your disability benefit's not going to be 100% of your salary. We typically see 60%.
Mm-hmm.
That's because the provider of that disability benefit is recognizing that you're not going to be potentially not paying federal and state taxes, nor are you paying into Social Security and Medicare on your disability benefit. A lot of times a corporate long-term disability benefit is paired with a Social Security disability benefit, likely a long-term situation.
Mm-hmm. And so if you were on disability for a long time, so what happens while you're to your employment status while you're on claim if you're considered to be disabled for your long term, usually your employment would end. If it's a short-term disability, then you can stay on payroll for a short amount of time and then resume employment. But if it's considered to be a long-term disability, then your employment would end. And then your paycheck would essentially be replaced or partially replaced by that benefit.
Yeah.
So when to review benefits, before I even answer this question, it definitely when you get a new job, I know I said it already, but it is so important to look at all this because sometimes you have an opportunity to get into all these kind of coverage and policies without having to go through underwriting where that opportunity may go away in the future. So definitely don't miss that window. We had a client who gave up his long-term disability benefit at some point and he realized that he couldn't get back in. So due to some medical condition. So definitely, this is serious, and it can have consequences. So definitely review your benefit very carefully when you get a new job. And if you have an existing job, I would say at least annually review everything, or as your situation changes. You know, if you get married, if you get divorced, if you have children, it's a good time to review benefits. And definitely set reminders for open enrollment periods, because there are times where you can apply and most of the time you can't. You know, you either have to wait for a change of situation that I mentioned earlier, or an open enrollment window.
Yep, great point.
And it's not December 31st, usually it's some random date in the fall, or some companies have other
Which is
dates.
why we're having this discussion now.
Right.
It's often like October 15th or November 1st or something like that.
It'd be too easy to make it uniform, right?
Yeah.
So let me see if we have any questions. I don't think so, but just want to make sure before we move forward. So what other extraordinary benefits do you see out there, Di?
Well, I wanted to share this because while it's not available to everyone, when it is so generous that I want to be sure that when reviewing things like your benefit package or a summary of benefits provided by the company, these sort of employee assistance programs are usually pretty well shared, marketed, what have you, but some of these more nuanced benefits are not. And we've been the recipients of compensation from corporations to do financial planning for their executives. And we know that also extends to tax planning and estate planning. That's a wonderful benefit to take advantage of. And sometimes for our clients who worked with us for years, and they have the opportunity to get a financial planning benefit, sometimes they'll include the kids, and now their children will get a benefit because we've gotten things well under control. But the benefits there, it's use it or lose it. And then health and wellness, again, not just the gym membership, we shared that as an example, but there's a lot of mental health benefits. There's counseling and other benefits that are available, again, usually pretty well documented and shared through the the legal benefits through the employee assist. And then there's rarely, we see it less and less, but there are benefits that employers provide that include long-term care insurance. And not only for the employee, which is really nice, for the employee and sometimes for their family. Not uncommon to see a benefit for an employee and their spouse, but also some extend to parents or to children. So when long-term care is offered, we highly encourage you to take a look at that. And again, as Cecile shared on health insurance, the same may be true on long-term care insurance. It may be an offering. It just may or may not be the most economical way to get that benefit, but it's worth the discussion. It's worth sharing with us, worth sharing with your financial advisor to try to get the details and a cost analysis of whether participating in a group long-term care makes sense.
It's long-term care insurance can be so costly now. So if your employer offers to subsidize it in any way, it's definitely worth looking at. So I know the government has a very generous subsidy. There's some downsides to it too. So it's never black or white. So definitely worth the conversation.
Completely agree.
So another benefit that's pretty common, again, not offered by every single employer, but usually some kind of retirement benefit will be offered. And it usually comes in the form of a 401k or a Roth 401k. You know, if you work for the government, it might be TSP or Roth TSP, or even if you work for a municipality or a school system, it might be a 403b. So in this case, we'll just use 401k and Roth 401k. But it's essentially the same thing all across. So the first thing to ask before you even enroll in your retirement plan is a Roth option offered? And if a Roth option is offered to you, does it make sense to contribute to that Roth option? Or are you better off just going the traditional tax deferred way? So why would you contribute to a Roth? The traditional way of thinking around this is, well, if you're young and your taxable income is not that high, then a Roth makes a lot of sense. But we've seen recently that, Roth can make sense also for older people who may not have a lot of post-tax dollars saved. When sometimes we'll see someone who's, in their 50s and has like over $1 million in a 401k and $1 million in a house, but not necessarily a lot of other assets. So then it becomes important to kind of diversify that pool of money so that in retirement, you're not stuck with only having taxable distributions from your retirement account. So there are some circumstances where a Roth makes sense even when you're earning a lot or when you're older.
And anyone that offers a Roth 401k, the employee is eligible to participate. Where in a traditional Roth IRA, there are income limits. So you can participate in a Roth 401k at any earnings level, where
That is a great point.
Roth IRA, right?
Yeah.
So that gives us an opportunity that may not be available outside of this qualified retirement account from your employer.
Definitely. Yes, there's definitely different rules. So why make it simple again? Keeps us employed. That's what I like to joke about. So some people will ask, especially young people, if I'm just starting out, how much should I contribute to my 401k? The answer is definitely take advantage of the employer match. That's free money to you. If your employer matches 5% of your salary, then definitely contribute 5%. Again, that's just free money to you. So that's pretty easy. Beyond that, it will depend on a lot of things. But the more you can contribute to your retirement account, typically the better, just from being prepared for retirement, but also from a tax savings perspective. There's just not that many tax savings strategies available anymore. So tax deferral is the most powerful thing you can do to reduce your taxable income. Another question that may be relevant to ask is, does your plan offer in-service distributions? And this typically applies to you if you're 55 or older. And the relevance of this is, they are what we call, and this may go away, we're in September of 2020, and there's a tax proposal on the table, and things might change in September of 2021. Oh my gosh, that's it, 2020. Things might change in 2022. But as of now, there's what we call a mega Roth strategy. And this is actually, in my dorky opinion, really cool. So it really happens when you've essentially maxed out your 401k, but you still have a lot of cushion in your cash flow, and you have the ability to save a lot more. This would allow you to contribute basically through a back door to a Roth. So it first involves you having an ability to take out, to do an in-service distribution and then do a Roth IRA conversion. So I'm not going to bore you with the details, but this can be a powerful planning tool. So do ask if you have the ability to do in-service distributions. We put on here too that it's important to review your summary plan description every year. And the summary plan description is basically a governing document around your 401k, kind of spells out the rules of your 401k or your retirement plan. So it's good to share with your financial advisor, at least on an annual basis, because they'll let your advisor know what's available to you and kind of the bells and whistles of your plan. So.
And if the plan makes any permanent changes, it's revised. They send you the summary plan description. It might look the same on page 1, but internally it shares that there's been, say, an increase to a benefit or an opportunity to participate in the corporate stock fund within the plan, and that didn't exist before. Things like that. There might be options or investment changes or contribution or again, adding in the in-service distribution as an option. So great to review the plan summary when it's offered by the employer.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of which, you're definitely make sure to review your investment options at least annually too, just to make sure that, your retirement account matches your overall investment strategy and it makes sense. As markets we've had a small correction last week, but as markets keep on going up and up and up, you may end up being more aggressive than you meant to be. So reviewing your investment options and rebalancing on an ongoing basis is definitely very important. So share that with your advisor too. And Diane, do you want, I know you were mentioning earlier the power of dollar cost averaging.
Well, yeah, I think when things do get choppy, and we have a question we can look at here in a minute.
Mhm.
When things get choppy in the market, we sometimes get a call and say, should I make changes to my 401k? And we will take a look at that and say, perhaps, but likely we'd want to stay the course, because when you're dollar cost averaging into equities anyway, when there's a correction, your same $100 investment is actually buying more shares of any of those funds when the fund loses value. So it's counterintuitive. You maybe want to rethink or feel the stress of the volatility, but the volatility is your friend when it comes to dollar cost averaging, meaning putting money in pay period after pay period on a systematic basis. That could really be beneficial. And from our perspective, for our clients, we're often dampening the risk in other assets in their portfolio.
Mm-hmm.
We're taking on the more conservative, the more diversified, the more defensive, and we're encouraging the growth-oriented investments to be added to the 401k.
Oh, that is true. Diane, we have a question about what we mean by in-service distributions.
Okay, so essentially that means you're continuing to work for the company, hence you're still there and in service, but you have the flexibility, the option to make a withdrawal at a given age. Usually it's age 55, sometimes older, but it's all created in the plan design. But typically an in-service distribution is for employees who are 55 and older, who continue to work for the organization. Say you're going to work there for 10 more years, but you're 55, you intend to work until 65, but you have the option at that time to roll over all or a portion of your 401k to your own IRA. Now, if you have great investment choices in your 401k, what would be the point of rolling it to the IRA? Well, for other strategic decisions that Cecile mentioned earlier. So in-service distribution means a rollover from 401k to IRA, and from IRA, either different investment decisions. You know, some plans offer 5 or 6 investment choices. You get a growth fund, a balanced fund, an income fund, and a couple of assets.
It's very limited.
Very limited. If that's the case, and you have the opportunity for in-service distribution, and we can make different choices, adding international, emerging markets, or even a portion of the 401k can be rolled for the sake of diversification, other strategies, or once in an IRA, the ability to do a Roth conversion, which is what Cecile was sharing. So we call it the Mega Roth strategy, or actually it's deemed the Mega Roth strategy because there are opportunities, especially in unique market environments. Say last year when the pandemic hit and the stock market dropped by 36% in the matter of a few weeks, and in-service distribution moved to an IRA, we could have taken advantage of the lower value of assets in a retirement account to convert to an IRA, that when we had the recovery, which we did, and typically, you know, it's only a matter of time as to when things will recover, those assets got to grow from that point forward, from conversion forward, completely tax-free.
That's pretty powerful.
Yeah, very powerful.
Good. Good. And then sometimes we see, you know, beyond those basic benefits, we actually do see some enhanced benefits, like that, and some of it is included in the total compensation package. But Di, do you want to talk about what we see out there?
Yes, because I mean, this can sometimes be the most lucrative of benefits, but not available to everyone. But when it is, there are typically, it's a form of compensation designed to keep valuable employees around when the company offers it. Oftentimes they're offering it to their most valuable executives, and sometimes it's in exchange or because the executives chose to take less earnings, or there was even smaller startup companies with less earnings to offer, but they offer restricted stock awards or restricted stock units. And those all they have different treatment, mostly based on whether you own the stock or you own the ability to buy the stock. So restricted stock units look a lot similar. People get them confused with stock options. And granting of stock options is not too dissimilar. And that is, your employer is giving you the ability to purchase shares of the stock at a lower price. And you hope that over time, the stock grows in value during this passage of time that we call the vesting period, which could be anywhere from 3 years to 5 years, typically, depending on restricted stock is not typical to see that past 3 years. Grants could be vested over 3 to 5 years and expiring over a period of potentially 10 years. But this is company stock where the employee has the opportunity to either receive shares or receive the opportunity to purchase shares. And then there's tax implications based on that, whether it's restricted stock of some sort, awards or units, or stock options. Stock options, for instance, it's the opportunity to buy, but it's not a taxable event when they are granted. That's different than the restricted stock awards or stock units. So there's different tax implications. Stock options, largely, we're looking at ordinary income when the stock units or the options are exercised. The stock, though, if you decide to hold on to the stock and it continues to grow, then you have capital gains treatment on from the time in which you received stock instead of the promise to buy the stock. So and that gets a little confusing, but if you think of the timeline, the implications are typically ordinary income when you're the recipient of a stock, restricted stock where the restriction is lifted, or the ability to take your grants, buy the stock, and exercise on that opportunity, versus holding on to the company stock from there forward and selling it down the road. That would get capital gains tax treatment. So complicated, yes, but really lucrative. It's all a form of compensation.
Yep. What I'll see here too, Di, what I've seen recently is when stocks vest, employers typically can't withhold more than 22%. So sometimes people, although again, it's much better than not, but people will end up with this huge tax bill and not know why at the end of the year. So it does require very careful monitoring.
Great point.
Yeah, you can't really wait until April of the next year to pay attention to the taxes. It really requires ongoing monitoring because the price of the stock may be all over the place. So it's also hard to anticipate what your tax bill will be. So definitely, if you're in this situation, talk to the professionals around you, your financial advisor and your tax advisor.
You know, it's a great benefit that's not always perceived to be great because no one understands it, or they don't understand how to make it a liquidity event. They don't know how to unwind it in some way. Something that, again, coordination between advisor and tax professional, not that complicated once we get into it, but if you're just sitting there with a collection of units or options, it can be pretty overwhelming.
It can't really be a wait and hold strategy. And on the stock options, by the way, they can expire worthless if you don't pay attention too. So you have to pay attention.
You know, what's nice about it is oftentimes it's not money out of your pocket until you make a decision, right? Then you either pay the taxes or buy the shares or pay the difference. And so again, it's one of those things that easy to stick on a shelf and forget about, but don't recommend that.
Yeah, don't wait until it expires.
Yeah, right. And it's happened. And then the stock purchase plans that are offered, that's pretty much universal. If there's a stock purchase plan, all employees are eligible to participate. How much to participate and whether or not. So what happens is people are really enthusiastic about the company they work for, and maybe they're here locally working for Oracle or Marriott or Northrop Grumman, these big organizations, and they're contributing to the company and they want to participate in a stock purchase plan. And while we think that's a great way to purchase the stock at a discount, those discounts will vary, right? You'll talk about that. But I'd also say, hey, your compensation's tied to that company. your earnings potential's tied. So do we want to own more of the company's stock, considering how it already impacts you, the being employed by that company? So it's a great plan when it's offered. Just don't know if we want to put all our eggs in that basket.
Mhm. And you need a strategy to diversify down the road so that you don't have too much of your net worth and compensation tied to just one thing. That's just too great of a risk.
The nice thing is the discount to fair value, right? So say the stock is trading at $20 a share. You might, because when you're participating in a stock purchase plan, you're typically pooling all your money with all the other employees that are participating. And then at one day, on 1 month or 1 quarter, this stock is being purchased on your behalf. And because you're waiting and consolidating with others, that stock is typically offered to you at a discount. And I think, Cecile, you were the one to say, watch the discount, because sometimes it could be as little as 10, but as great as 20%. Or
Right. It really depends. And what I've noticed is probably the smaller the company, the greater the discount, which makes sense. The higher the rest, the greater the discount. So I did have a client recently who had a 15% discount, I think, and that was very attractive. Why not buy something? You basically make 15% on your money from day one. That's a great return. But I had another client who started working for IBM, and IBM being as established and stable as they are, they only offered a 5% discount. So while it's still attractive, it was definitely not as attractive as a 15% discount. So it's good to look at the fine print there too, and see, what is the benefit.
And I think the idea of participating, why participate in any of these programs? A lot of times it's convenience. It's so great to have it directly debited from your paycheck, right? I'm going to apply a certain percentage to my retirement plan, traditional or Roth. I'm going to participate in the health savings account. You have a great sort of scale of importance that you've shared.
Yeah, I love this. Oops. Financial priorities. We get this question all the time about how do I prioritize my next dollar. So it just starts very basic. Like, if you think of the foundation of the house, the foundation of your financial plan is having your emergency reserves. It keeps you out of trouble, out of credit card debt and all that bad stuff. So emergency reserve is always first. And until you have 3 to 6 months in cash in your bank account, you probably shouldn't be thinking too much about other things. But anyway, moving on from there, you definitely want to take advantage of the HSA if you're eligible for a match, like we discussed. And then same thing with your 401k, or here they call it the defined contribution savings.
Because that could be 401k, 403b, and so on.
Right. So definitely employer match on both the HSA and the 401k. Then the next big one is to pay down any kind of bad debt that you have out there. By bad debt, I mean credit cards or anything that has a high interest rate. So in this example, they say 575, but really anything that's, that's more than 2-3%. And then after that, you want to contribute to your health savings account post match, and then add to your 401ks, and maximize that. The maximum contribution right now for a 401k is 19,500, unless you are over the age of 50, then there's also a catch-up that you can use. But once you've hit that maximum, then what do you do? So the next step would be to pay your lower interest loans. So think about student loans that have a better interest rate, less than 5-6%. I wouldn't necessarily pay down a mortgage at this point, especially in this interest rate environment, because that is just such cheap money. The assumption is if you can do better than 2 or 3% in the market, why pay down your mortgage? Again, everybody's situation is different, but if you're still working, there's probably a mortgage is probably not a debt to prioritize at this point. You also get a mortgage interest deduction. So this is actually good debt. I hate to say it on a recording, but there is such a thing as good debt sometimes. And then you definitely, once you've done all these things, you can definitely do an IRA contribution, knowing that it may not be deductible, depending on a few things, but likely not deductible. And then finally, once you've done all these things, and let's just say you still have some available cash flow to you at the end of the month, if you have some surplus cash flow, then you can start building a taxable account. So that would just be, think of a brokerage account where you can start buying stocks or mutual funds or exchange traded funds. And that's pretty powerful once you reach that point, because it really allows you some financial freedom and flexibility, because it's nice to have a lot of money in retirement accounts and so on and so forth, but it doesn't provide much liquidity, where once you start building a taxable account, then there's less tax ramification if you need to access that money. So
and we location, diversification of the location of the money when people near retirement. So this is maybe starting early, but as we get nearer to retirement, we may actually be encouraging less contribution, still maxing the employer match, but less contribution in retirement and diversifying into non-retirement accounts as well. So great place to get started and great way to prioritize the savings, but that too will shift the closer you get to retirement, right?
Definitely. Yeah. This is a good chart for most people, but as with everything, your situation is probably maybe different, and we're definitely happy to talk if needed. So if you have any questions, please feel free to submit. I know we're already running over. Oh my gosh, it's almost 45 minutes already, but happy to take a minute if you need to.
And I would also suggest, if it's so unique to your company, to you, and you want to have a private conversation, we're available. It's always great to get an opinion about anything from amount of contribution, which plan, traditional or Roth, investment choices. Those are all things that we're reviewing with our clients.
Good. Well, I don't see any questions coming in. We're already hitting the 45-minute mark. So I think we'll pause here. But as Diane said, we're available to answer any questions you may have. And this recording will be available on our website as well. So feel free to listen.
Enrollments are coming. So keep that in mind. Thanks, Cecile.
Okay. Thank you so much, everyone. And thank you, Diane. Have a good one.